you could observe 3.1% for a period of not longer than 30 seconds.
Icarus, I'm gonna reset the filter to 3.1%.
Hello everyone, welcome to Hedgehog Hobbies and welcome to episode 9 of my N-Gauge layout build. Today we're going to look at putting some finishing touches onto the box, including adding some lights. With that said, let's get started. So as you can see, the box is pretty much there in terms of the woodworking, but it certainly isn't finished. I'm going to start the improvements today by painting and varnishing the main panels. This should make them a little bit more hard-wearing, water-resistant, lay down the foundation for the back scene, and also just make them look a little bit nicer when you're viewing the box from the outside. So whilst I get on with painting the front and the back panels, I'd just like to thank everyone for tuning in and watching my videos. Those of you who've been subscribed for a while may have noticed there's a pretty big gap between this video and the last. I think it's been 18 months, maybe something like that. I had a bit of a shit time last year, to be honest, and didn't really feel like doing much of anything, particularly being on camera and making videos, so apologies for the big delay. The footage we're looking at now is actually from 2022, which is pretty crazy. But yeah, things are starting to feel a little bit better, so I'm hoping to get back into the swing of things and to put out some updates more regularly. So you've just seen me varnishing and painting the arch panel there, and now I'm going to follow the same process for the back panel and the lid combination. So start off by brushing on a couple layers of varnish. The tint has to go with the grain of the wood, so I try to do that as much as possible. I guess it gives you a slightly better finish, and it does say to use a brush rather than to use a roller, so I used a brush for it all. It takes a little bit longer, but it's not the end of the world, and it's also easy because you can get into the bolt holes and around the edges and stuff like that a bit easy with a brush. So once both the layers of varnish are dry, apply some masking tape, and I then seal the edge of the masking tape with the blue colour that I'm going to use for the background. This was just something I thought might help reduce the amount of paint that bleeds underneath when I use the roller, because the roller will have a lot more paint on it. I don't know if it actually worked, but I did it anyway, so there we go. Then once that is dry, I can then use the paint roller and be pretty liberal with how much paint I'm using. Get the panel painted nice and quick, and it leaves me with a pretty nice finish. You know, similar to the interior walls of a house. It's not perfect, but the coat's nice and smooth. It's covered all the wood grain, so I think it looks good enough for what I need it for. And then once that paint is dry, I can then remove the masking tape. It didn't really need doing, to be honest, because you can't actually see any of these painted edges. I just like to keep stuff neat, and it's something I've tried to do with the whole layout really, is even if you can't necessarily see stuff, it's just to try and keep it looking as neat as possible. And yeah, there's the edge. I think it looks okay, it's not too bad. Now that the main panels are done, we are going to move on to the little side panels that are on either edge. In the back of my mind, I've always wanted to be able to attach a fiddle yard of some description to the layout where the tunnel goes through the scenery. I don't really know exactly what that will look like, but all I know is I want to be able to attach the fiddle yard with the box on, which means I need to cut a hole in one of the side panels. So I'm going to start off by once again taking out the little threaded inserts. I think this is roughly the bazillionth time that I've done this, but oh well, luckily they come in and out pretty nice. So once the inserts are out, I'm going to follow a process that will be familiar to all of you who've drilled a glory hole before. We start off with a spade bit, drill all the way through the wood, That gives us enough space to get the sanding drum in, to get the shape roughly cut out. And then once that's done, I can use a hand rasp to get the final shape right, but that gives me a little bit more control than the Dremel does. And once the hole's been created, we can move on to painting the panel, and I'm going to use the same process as before. Starting off with a light sanding, that gives the paint something to key into. And then I'm going to apply the varnish with a brush, this time using a smaller brush, because I need to get into the detail around the wooden battens around the perimeter of the panel. Then again we will apply masking tape so that we get a reasonably neat edge when applying the sky blue colour. And for the blue I can use a roller because the inside face of these side panels is just flat. It is pretty satisfying seeing these little panels turn blue in super speed. I've gotten reasonably good at judging how much paint I need when I'm rolling stuff on, so I can paint these panels pretty efficiently now without too much mess. So once the paint is nice and dry, we are just going to sand it a tiny bit. That's just because there is a slight texture to the paint. When you apply it with a roller, it's a little bit orange peely. It's not too bad, but if I'm going to potentially paint over it later with a back scene, I want it to be pretty smooth. So I'm just sanding it quite lightly with a fine grade of sandpaper, and then once that's done, we can remove the masking tape, and then it's time for our favorite thing, threading the inserts back in. Luckily it's pretty satisfying running these things in and out. They always go in quite nicely, so no problems there. I guess some people probably wonder why I bother taking them in and out every time. Really it's just because I like the look of the metal, the kind of brass colored metal. I like how it looks versus the wood and the paint, having a nice clean round insert in there without being covered by varnish and stuff. I just think it looks a little bit neater. One extra thing I did for the side panels was print off some little top hat shapes on my 3D printer to cover off the holes from when I drilled them out to take the inserts. When I made these panels, I hadn't really thought of a good way to get the drill depth correct when I'm using the drill. So I just ran it all the way through the panel, and then later I came up with a way where I'd print a collar and that would define the drill depth. And I do wish I'd done that here because it would have looked a little bit neater, but these little cap things don't look too bad and they kind of add a little bit of interest to the panel, so it's not a huge deal, just something I would have done differently if I was to do it again. And with that said, the side panels are complete. So that should be all the exterior panels done. You can see by the discarded Christmas tree here, I think this must be very early 2023. I'm rocking my lovely fetching winter outfit, holding up the back panel with the integrated lid there. Here we have the proscenium arch, that's all looking good, painted and varnished. And we have the two side panels, one of them with the hole we made for the tunnel. And yeah, that should be all the exterior parts of the box done, which is a good feeling to be in that position. So I thought I'd show you the process of the box going together. We've got the sort of backbone here with the back panel and the lid, that always goes on first. Then we can attach the side panels. Everything's just going on kind of vaguely snug, not being fully tightened up, because you do need to wiggle things around a little bit just to get the bolt holes to line up. And yeah, I've got an excessive amount of bolts holding the box together. I think it's about 20, but I do need them because the wood I get from B&Q isn't perfectly flat, so having a whole load of bolt holes means that we can sort of pull everything into alignment. With the box all put together, I think it looks really good. I'm pleased with the colour of the wood. I think it looks nice with the black fasteners. Kind of has like a old style chest kind of vibe to it. And it's also super sturdy when it's put together, which is nice. Makes me feel confident I can put it away, not have to worry about the layout at all, which is really nice. And the blue back scene is also looking pretty good. The paint's gone on nice and evenly and smoothly, so yeah, pleased with it so far. So now that the box is painted and varnished, it's looking pretty good. But having this box over the top of the layout does lead to one issue, and that is everything in there is pretty dark. Even when I'm using the box indoors with all the lights on, it's a little bit gloomy inside. So to counteract that, we're going to look at adding some LED lights to illuminate stuff. So let's get started with that. So the lighting panel isn't visible from the outside. It's just used to hold the lighting and the associated electronics. I'm going to paint it sky blue both sides, mostly just to keep the moisture out, and also I'm hoping a nice light color might help to reflect some of the light downwards from the LEDs. I don't really know if that's going to work, but that's the plan. So yeah, once again we're cracking out the sky blue, nice flat panel, so we can use a paint roller. I actually started painting this before I realized I needed to drill a bunch more holes for the actual light fixtures, because I need to run wires and things like that through the panel. So I painted one side, then I'm just drilling some holes, then I'm going to paint the other side, and I'll just use a brush to kind of make sure the insides of the hole is covered as well, just to make sure there's no route for moisture to get in. So the plan here is to house a whole bunch of LEDs in these individual little fixtures which I 3D printed. After some testing, the LEDs that I could buy were either too white or too yellow. So each one of these fixtures is designed to take 2 LEDs, and I'll put one of the white ones in and one of the yellows in, and that gives me the right kind of color temperature that I'm after. The fixtures simply screw into the panel with some self-tappers, and then I have wired together the LEDs with some solder, and it's just a case of making a whole load of these little pairs and then feeding them through the holes we drilled earlier. That's the wires going through, and then gluing the LEDs into the little fixture. Once the LEDs are in, I add a little piece of baking paper across the bulb holder. This acts as a light diffuser because the light coming out of the LEDs can be pretty harsh, so this just softens it a little bit and helps it to look a little bit more natural. So all those fixtures, they're on the underside of the panel, which you'll be able to see if you looked up through the arch. Now we need to wire up the top of the panel, and I solder everything to one of these thingies, and I've searched and I can't figure out what it's called. They're really handy for soldering stuff too. If anyone can remember what it's called, let us know, because it might help someone else out if they need to buy one. But yeah, they're pretty cheap and you can solder a whole bunch of stuff to them, so they're very useful. And I also add a little junction box. We have a few of these underneath as well. I like using these things because you can bolt things in and out just under like a little screw with a spade connector, which means it's really easy to disassemble stuff. So I've made like a clampy thing, which I'll show you later, again similar to how we have in the baseboard, for taking the power in, because this takes a separate power plug from the outside. It doesn't run from the baseboard power because I couldn't find a nice way to get a wire up to the top. So yeah, I'll show you that later, but having this junction box just means I can bolt that whole bit in and out, which makes life a bit easier rather than having it all soldered together. Then one of the last things to do is wire in a pretty beefy resistor. I did do the calculations on this to figure out what I would need in terms of the current. So yeah, it's pretty big, probably the biggest resistor I've ever wired into something. So it should be more than enough to deal with the current we've got without getting too hot. So that gets wired in and then covered up with some heat shrink. One thing here is I wish I'd made it a little bit easier to remove this in case I wanted to change how bright the lights are, or I could have even wired in a little potentiometer dimmer switch here, which would have been pretty cool. So if you can manage to tear your eyes away from all the random crap I have on my desk, you'll see the bottom of the light panel here with the 8 light fixtures on it. So this is the side facing down into the box, and then on the top side, the one you won't see, we've got all the wiring and electronics on that side. Here's the socket thing I was talking about earlier. I bought the actual electrical connector thing off the shelf, and then I glue it into a little 3D printed holder, and that means I can then clamp that into the layout rather than gluing it in, so this can be entirely replaceable without having to drill anything out, which is quite nice. You can see it here towards the top of the image, so the whole thing is just clamped to the wood with that socket cap screw there, so that comes out nice and easily. And then I've wired in an inline fuse, which you can see there as well in a little holder. That just takes a blade fuse similar to what you'd have in your car, and that bolts into the junction box which I talked about, so that whole thing can be removed, which is really nice. So if I have any issues with that, I can just take it off and play with it until I can get it to work properly. So everything is connected up. Time for the big reveal on the lights. So I think they look pretty good. The color temperature is spot on, it's exactly what I wanted, but there are a few issues which you can probably spot. Probably the biggest one is the corners of the box have become very noticeable. This is something I expected would happen. I tried to figure out a way that I could sort of smooth those corners off, but there wasn't really a nice way to do that. So I'm going to have to think if there's anything I can do to make that look better. The second one is the back panel has quite a clear pattern where the lights are shining on it. They're relatively diffused because of the baking paper, but there's still sort of 4 distinct kind of balls on the back of the wall, which isn't ideal. So again, I'll have to think about if I can fix that. I might need to maybe add some more lights in those spaces to fill in the dark areas. And then the other thing is, whilst the amount of light is more than enough for when you're sitting there in person, it's not quite bright enough to really film with. You can see that the images are quite grainy. The picture quality isn't very good, and that's because there's not enough light. So I may swap out the resistor. I'm gonna see how I feel about it, but I may swap out the resistor and make the lights a little bit brighter. So I did take the opportunity to take a few nice pictures with the lid on, and I think even just with the plain blue background, it's a big improvement over being able to see my bed sheets and other things, which are very distracting and certainly spoil the pictures. So yeah, that's really nice to have, and I don't have to move stuff around so much to make sure I don't have anything too embarrassing in the background. So 2 thumbs up from me, and yeah, things are looking good. And I did really want to show off the J50 here. I had this on order for ages. It's a Sonic Models locomotive, and I had it on order for what felt like a year, and it arrived a little while ago, but it's become my favorite looking engine I have. It's a reasonably good runner. It's not perfect, but yeah, with the red lining, it looks really cool. So with the box complete and the lighting installed, that's about it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed the video. I have the next couple planned and mostly filmed, so I'm hoping they'll be out much quicker than this one was, and I hope to see you there. Bye for now.